Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The first warning came at 2:17 a.m. when Robert Collins spotted the headlights in his mirrors. After 12 years hauling freight across the Midwest, the 44-year-old trucker from Sacramento had developed an instinct for trouble. And the way those lights had appeared suddenly on the empty Nevada highway triggered every alarm bell his experience had taught him to trust. Interstate 80 through Nevada earned its reputation as the loneliest road in America, honestly. Stretches of highway extended for dozens of miles without services, rest areas, or even cell phone coverage. For truckers crossing this desolate corridor, isolation was both a blessing and a curse. Peaceful driving conditions that could turn deadly if something went wrong. Collins was hauling electronics from Los Angeles to Chicago, valuable cargo that made him cautious about his surroundings. Company security protocols required drivers to vary their routes and timing when carrying high-value freight, but I-80 through Nevada offered limited alternatives. Most commercial traffic had no choice but to follow the same basic path across the desert. The headlights behind him maintained exactly the same distance for 20 minutes, matching his speed with mechanical precision that professional drivers would recognize as deliberately menacing. When Collins accelerated, the following vehicle matched him. When he slowed, it maintained that exact same spacing. Collins reached for his CB radio, keying the microphone to channel 19. Breaker 19, this is the white Freightliner eastbound at mile marker. 201, looking for a radio check from anyone monitoring. Dead silence answered him. No static, no background chatter, no response from other truckers who should have been crossing Nevada's highways during the early morning hours. The absence of normal CB traffic was another warning sign that something was seriously wrong. Collins checked his GPS and calculated the distance to the next truck stop, 47 miles ahead at Elko. Under normal circumstances, he could reach safety within 40 minutes. But these weren't normal circumstances, and the vehicle behind him showed no signs of casual travel. At 2:43 a.m., the stalking vehicle began closing the distance. Collins watched his mirrors as the headlights grew larger, moving from their consistent following position to what traffic experts call the intimidation zone, close enough to suggest aggressive intent without actually initiating contact. Collins's military training from his Army service in Iraq provided a framework for analyzing the threat. The following vehicle's behavior demonstrated tactical awareness and patience, characteristics that suggested professional predatory behavior rather than road rage or random aggression. He activated his truck's satellite communication system and composed an emergency message to his dispatcher. Possible stalking situation on Interstate 80 eastbound Nevada. Unknown vehicle following for 30-plus minutes. Requesting law enforcement assistance at my GPS coordinates. The response came back within minutes. Message received. Nevada Highway Patrol notified. Nearest unit is approximately 45 minutes from your location. Can you reach Elko truck stop safely? Collins checked his mirrors again. The stalking vehicle had moved even closer, its headlights now filling his entire rear view. Unknown, situation escalating, vehicle now tailgating aggressively. What happened next would be seared into Collins' memory for the rest of his life. The stalking vehicle suddenly accelerated and pulled alongside his truck in the left lane. Through his side window, Collins caught a glimpse of the driver. A man in his 30s wearing what appeared to be military-style clothing, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. The man was holding something in his right hand, pointing it toward Collins' cab. Even in the limited visibility of the desert night, Collins could see enough to recognize the object as a handgun. Collins instinctively swerved right, putting distance between his truck and the armed attacker. The stalking vehicle dropped back and resumed its following position, but the message was clear. This wasn't random highway aggression. Someone was hunting him. His CB radio suddenly crackled to life. "White Freightliner, you need to pull over at the next exit. We need to have a conversation." The voice was calm, conversational, and absolutely terrifying in its casual tone. Collins had heard that same false friendliness in Iraq from insurgents who used psychological warfare to break down their target's resistance. Collins keyed his microphone. "Negative. I'm continuing to my destination. Law enforcement has been notified of your aggressive driving." The response was immediate and chilling. "Law enforcement is 45 minutes away. A lot can happen in 45 minutes. The stalker knew about Collins' communication with authorities, which meant he was either monitoring police frequencies or had access to law enforcement information. Either possibility suggested resources and planning that elevated the threat far beyond random highway crime. Collins checked his fuel gauge, 3/4 full, enough to reach Salt Lake City if necessary. His truck was mechanically sound, and he had experience with defensive driving techniques. But his pursuer had demonstrated tactical knowledge and weaponry, advantages that could overcome Collins's transportation resources. At 2:51 a.m., the stalking vehicle disappeared. Collins checked his mirrors continuously for 5 minutes, scanning every direction for signs of the predator. The highway behind him remained empty, no headlights visible in the vast desert darkness. Either his pursuer had given up, or he was planning something more sophisticated than a simple highway chase. Collins continued monitoring his CB radio and satellite communication system while maintaining maximum legal speed toward Elko. Every few minutes, he broadcast his position and situation to anyone monitoring the frequencies, creating a record of events that would help law enforcement if something happened to him. At 3:18 a.m., Collins discovered what had happened to his stalker. As he crested a low hill, his headlights illuminated a horrifying scene in the valley ahead. A truck stop that should have been his destination, the Sunset Travel Plaza at Elko, was dark except for emergency lighting. Multiple vehicles were positioned around the facility's perimeter, blocking the normal traffic flow. Collins grabbed his binoculars and studied the scene from a safe distance. The vehicles blocking the truck stop weren't law enforcement. They were civilian cars and SUVs arranged in tactical positions that would control anyone approaching the facility. The truck stop's main building showed no signs of normal operation, and Collins could see figures moving between the vehicles with coordination that suggested military or law enforcement training. His stalker hadn't given up. He had radioed ahead to accomplices who were waiting at Collins's most likely destination. This wasn't a random attack. It was a coordinated hunting operation that had been planned and rehearsed. Collins activated his emergency beacon and began broadcasting on every frequency his radio could access. "Mayday, Mayday, this is commercial vehicle, operator Robert Collins on I-80 eastbound Nevada. Multiple subjects have taken control of Elko truck stop. Coordinated attack in progress. Request immediate law enforcement and emergency services response." The response to his broadcasts came not from authorities, but from his original stalker. "Mr. Collins, you're making this more difficult than it needs to be. Just pull over and we can discuss this like civilized people." The use of his name confirmed Collins's worst fears. These weren't random criminals. They had targeted him specifically, researched his identity, and planned an operation designed to capture him at a location where help would be hours away. Collins made a decision that would save his life. but fundamentally change his understanding of the dangers facing commercial drivers on America's highways. Instead of continuing toward the compromised truck stop, he took the next exit and began driving north on a secondary highway that led toward Idaho. His CB radio erupted with transmissions from multiple voices, all coordinating the search for his truck. The hunting party had at least 6 vehicles and sophisticated communication equipment. They were tracking his movements and adjusting their positions to intercept him regardless of which route he chose. What followed was a 3-hour chase across some of the most isolated terrain in the American West. Collins used every defensive driving technique his military training had taught him, plus knowledge of local geography he'd accumulated during 12 years of commercial driving. The hunters demonstrated resources and capabilities that suggested professional criminal organization or worse. They had access to real-time GPS tracking of his truck, communication intercepts that allowed them to monitor his emergency broadcasts, and coordination that indicated extensive experience with mobile operations. At 5:47 a.m., Collins's truck crested a ridge and descended into a valley where he could see the lights of a Nevada highway patrol station. The facility was small, probably manned by only 2 or 3 officers, but it represented legitimate authority and communication capabilities that would change the tactical situation completely. Collins broadcast his approach to the patrol station and requested emergency assistance. The response came from a Nevada state trooper who had been monitoring his emergency broadcasts for the past 2 hours. "Mr. Collins, we've been tracking your situation. Drive directly to our location. Units are being deployed to intercept your pursuers." As Collins pulled into the patrol station, he could see his hunters' vehicles taking defensive positions in the hills surrounding the facility. They had followed him to the very edge of law enforcement response, demonstrating either desperate commitment to their objective or confidence that they could handle whatever resistance they encountered. The siege that followed lasted until dawn, when federal agents arrived with helicopters and tactical teams. The investigation that followed revealed one of the most sophisticated serial murder operations ever discovered targeting commercial drivers. The hunting party was led by Marcus Thompson, a former military contractor who had developed a methodical system for stalking and killing long-haul truckers in isolated areas across the western United States. His operation combined military tactics with intimate knowledge of commercial transportation patterns to select victims who could disappear for days before anyone noticed they were missing. Thompson's team had been responsible for at least 17 murders over a 3-year period, targeting drivers whose routes took them through isolated areas where crimes could be committed without immediate law enforcement response. They used sophisticated surveillance equipment to track potential victims and communications intercepts to monitor emergency broadcasts. Collins had been selected because his route and cargo made him a valuable target. Electronics shipments that could be quickly resold while his truck and trailer provided transportation assets for future operations. The hunters had researched his driving patterns, identified his most likely destinations, and prepared tactical positions at multiple locations where they could intercept him. The federal investigation expanded to include similar cases across 12 states, ultimately linking Thompson's organization to crimes that had been attributed to accidents, mechanical failures, or random violence. The systematic nature of the hunting operation had allowed it to operate undetected by law enforcement agencies that weren't coordinating information about missing truckers. For Robert Collins, the experience became a career-defining moment that transformed him from a transportation professional into a national expert on driver safety and security awareness. He began working with federal authorities and industry organizations to develop protocols for recognizing and responding to coordinated criminal targeting of commercial drivers. His recommendations included enhanced communication procedures, tactical training for drivers operating in isolated areas, and coordination between transportation companies and law enforcement agencies to track unusual patterns of driver disappearances or equipment failures. The case led to federal legislation requiring GPS tracking and emergency communication systems in all commercial vehicles operating in remote areas, along with protocols for law enforcement agencies to coordinate investigations of missing commercial drivers across state boundaries. Today, Collins continues to drive long-haul freight across America's highways, but his truck is equipped with military-grade communication systems and defensive equipment that would have been unthinkable before his encounter with Webb's hunting party. His company has implemented security protocols that treat commercial drivers as potential targets for organized criminal activity rather than random highway crime. Hidden in Collins's cab is a detailed emergency response manual he developed with federal law enforcement, along with equipment that goes beyond standard trucking safety gear. The message is clear. When criminals use military tactics to hunt commercial drivers, drivers need military-level responses to survive. For truckers crossing America's most isolated highways, Collins's experience has become required reading. A reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers come not from weather, mechanical failures, or traffic accidents, but from predators who understand exactly how to exploit the isolation and predictability of commercial transportation. The Interstate 80 murders, as they became known in law enforcement circles, fundamentally changed how the trucking industry approaches driver safety in remote areas. Collins' survival demonstrated that even sophisticated hunting operations could be defeated by drivers who understood tactical principles and maintained communication with support networks. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Collins' ordeal was the realization that Webb's organization had been operating successfully for years, killing experienced professional drivers who had survived decades on America's highways, only to fall victim to predators who had studied their patterns and exploited their vulnerabilities. As veteran drivers often say about the Nevada incident, Collins didn't just save his own life, he exposed a threat that every one of us faces every time we drive through empty country. The hunters had been escalating their operations and expanding their territory, and there's no telling how many more drivers would have died if their network hadn't been broken by one trucker's refusal to become a victim. The highways are still long and lonely, the freight still needs to move, and drivers still cross the empty spaces that make America's economy possible. But since March 15, 2019, they drive with the knowledge that sometimes the lights in their mirrors don't belong to fellow travelers, but to hunters who see isolation as opportunity and commercial drivers as prey. The convoy appeared in William Rodriguez's mirrors at exactly 2:17 a.m., materializing from the desert darkness like a coordinated nightmare. 3 identical black SUVs running in perfect formation, their headlights creating a pattern of geometric precision that no casual travelers would maintain through the empty Arizona night. Rodriguez was hauling high-value electronics from Los Angeles to Atlanta, $47 million worth of semiconductor components destined for military contractors. The 38-year-old trucker from El Paso had been selected for this assignment because of his spotless safety record and security clearance. But no amount of preparation could have anticipated the level of sophistication he was about to encounter. The electronics shipment was classified as sensitive but unclassified cargo, requiring enhanced security protocols but not full military escort. Rodriguez's truck was equipped with GPS tracking, satellite communication, and tamper-evident seals that would alert authorities if anyone attempted to access the cargo without authorization. What the security planners hadn't anticipated was an enemy that understood those systems better than the people who designed them. Rodriguez first noticed the convoy when it appeared simultaneously in his side and rear mirrors, moving from invisible to obvious in a matter of seconds. 3 vehicles spaced exactly 100 meters apart, traveling at precisely his speed, maintaining formation with military precision. professional drivers develop instincts about other vehicles on the highway. Casual travelers vary their speed, change lanes occasionally, and maintain irregular following distances. The convoy behind Rodriguez was doing none of those things. They were executing a tactical movement that suggested extensive planning and rehearsal. Rodriguez reached for his CB radio, switching to channel 19 for routine trucker communication. Breaker 19, this is the white Peterbilt eastbound on I-40, looking for a radio check. The response came immediately from multiple voices speaking in perfect synchronization. Good evening, white Peterbilt. Beautiful night for a drive. 3 different speakers, identical words, coordinated timing. Rodriguez's blood ran cold as he realized he was dealing with professionals who had practiced this operation extensively. Y'all traveling together? Rodriguez transmitted, keeping his voice casual while his mind raced through threat assessment protocols. You could say that, came the reply. We have similar destinations. Rodriguez checked his GPS. The next major truck stop was 43 miles ahead at Flagstaff, but his route included several smaller facilities and rest areas. The question was whether he could reach help before the convoy made their move, whatever that move might be. His truck's satellite communication system showed full signal strength. He could alert his dispatcher and federal authorities immediately, but doing so might trigger an immediate attack. The convoy clearly had sophisticated equipment and organization. They might be monitoring his communications frequencies. Rodriguez made a decision that would later be called brilliant by federal investigators. Instead of using official channels that might be monitored, he began broadcasting coded messages over the CB radio, disguised as casual trucker conversation. Breaker 19, this is that white Pete again. Got my eyes on some real professional scenery out here. 3 shiny rigs running tight formation, real military-style discipline. Reminds me of that old convoy song, you know the one. To casual listeners, it sounded like routine highway chatter, but experienced truckers would recognize the coded language. Multiple vehicles in suspicious formation, military-style coordination, possible threat situation requiring assistance. The response came from an unexpected source. Copy that, White Pete. This is a red Kenworth about 15 miles ahead of your position. I always loved that convoy song. Maybe we can arrange some music for y'all. Rodriguez felt a surge of relief. Another trucker had understood his coded message and was positioning to help. But his relief evaporated when he realized the transmission had come from one of the vehicles in the convoy behind him, not from ahead on the highway. They weren't just professional criminals. They were professionals who understood trucker culture, communication protocols, and coded language. Someone had trained them very well indeed. Appreciate the offer, Rodriguez transmitted, his voice steady despite his growing alarm. But I prefer driving with the radio off. Helps me concentrate. It was another coded message, a request for radio silence from anyone monitoring the frequency. But the damage was done. The convoy knew he was aware of their intentions and was attempting to call for help. The lead SUV began closing distance, moving from 100 meters to 50, then 25. Rodriguez could see multiple occupants in each vehicle, at least one in each car pointing sophisticated equipment toward his truck. Electronic surveillance gear, he realized. They were scanning his communications and possibly jamming his ability to call for help. Rodriguez tested his satellite system and discovered his worst fears confirmed. The device showed full reception, but couldn't establish connections to his dispatcher or emergency services. The convoy was using military-grade electronic warfare equipment to isolate him from outside assistance. His CB radio continued to function, operating on frequencies the jammers couldn't block. Rodriguez keyed his microphone one final time. Breaker 19. This is the White Pete requesting immediate assistance. I-40 eastbound mile marker 208. 3-vehicle convoy, organized theft in progress. Repeat, cargo theft in progress. The response was immediate and terrifying. All 3 SUVs activated emergency light bars, filling the desert highway with strobing patterns of red and blue. To anyone observing from a distance, it would appear to be a legitimate law enforcement stop. But Rodriguez knew better. Real police didn't travel in unmarked civilian SUVs, didn't coordinate over CB radio, and didn't spend weeks researching specific cargo shipments before making traffic stops. A new voice came over the CB, calm and professional. All traffic on I-40 eastbound. This is Arizona State Police conducting a traffic stop at mile marker 208. Reduce speed and move to the right lane. Operation in progress. The voice sounded completely authentic, exactly like a real police dispatcher. These weren't amateurs playing dress-up. They were professionals with law enforcement training, military equipment, and inside information about classified cargo shipments. Rodriguez faced a terrible choice. He could comply with what appeared to be legitimate authority and hope they only wanted his cargo. He could run, triggering a high-speed chase through the desert that would probably end with his death. Or he could try something desperate that might save both his life and $47 million worth of military technology. He chose desperate. Rodriguez switched off his headlights and activated his truck's emergency systems while swerving onto the highway shoulder. Modern commercial vehicles were equipped with multiple tracking and communication devices, including systems designed to function even when primary communications were jammed. While the convoy scrambled to respond to his sudden maneuver, Rodriguez triggered every emergency beacon his truck possessed. Satellite GPS alerts, emergency radio transmitters, and automatic uploads of his truck's camera footage to cloud servers that the hijackers couldn't access. The convoy had planned for standard law enforcement response, but they hadn't anticipated a driver who understood their electronic capabilities better than they understood his defensive systems. What followed was a deadly pursuit across the Arizona desert that tested the limits of both commercial vehicle design and criminal determination. Rodriguez used maintenance roads, construction zones, and off-highway terrain where his truck's weight and ground clearance became advantages rather than limitations. The hijackers' coordination began breaking down as they were forced to adapt to circumstances they hadn't planned for. Their radio communications, monitored by federal authorities alerted by Rodriguez's emergency beacons, revealed the scope of their operation and the value of the cargo they were attempting to steal. The convoy consisted of former military contractors working for foreign intelligence services, seeking specific semiconductor technology. They had infiltrated transportation company databases to identify valuable shipments, researched driver patterns and route timing, and prepared tactical responses for multiple contingencies. Rodriguez's cargo wasn't just expensive electronics. It was prototype communication technology that would give foreign governments significant military advantages if they could reverse engineer the components. The hijacking was industrial espionage disguised as highway robbery, with national security implications that went far beyond simple cargo theft. The pursuit lasted 97 minutes, ending when FBI helicopters and Arizona State Police tactical units surrounded the convoy in a box canyon 30 miles south of I-40. The firefight that followed resulted in 2 arrests, 1 death, and the recovery of equipment indicating this was the 7th such operation the group had conducted across the southwestern United States. The investigation revealed troubling details about the vulnerability of sensitive cargo shipments to sophisticated criminal enterprises. The hijackers had access to transportation manifests, route information, and driver schedules obtained through cyber attacks on defense contractors and shipping companies. Most disturbing was the discovery that the convoy had been tracking Rodriguez's truck for over 150 miles, gathering intelligence about his communication habits, defensive capabilities, and security protocols before making their move. They had planned contingencies for law enforcement response, media attention, and diplomatic complications that would arise if their operation was exposed. Rodriguez's quick thinking and technical knowledge had prevented not just theft, but a significant breach of national security. The semiconductor components he was carrying represented years of research and development that foreign governments would have used to counter American military advantages. The federal investigation expanded to include cybersecurity reviews of all defense contractors involved in sensitive technology shipments, enhanced background checks for personnel with access to shipping information, and new protocols for protecting high-value cargo from coordinated criminal attacks. For William Rodriguez, the experience became a turning point that transformed him from a transportation professional into a national security consultant. He began working with federal agencies to identify vulnerabilities in sensitive cargo transportation and develop countermeasures for sophisticated hijacking operations. His recommendations included enhanced driver training in electronic warfare recognition, tactical response procedures for coordinated attacks, and communication protocols that couldn't be easily jammed by criminal organizations with military-grade equipment. The I-40 hijacking attempt led to significant changes in how sensitive cargo is transported across America's highways. Rodriguez's survival and the preservation of critical technology demonstrated that even well-planned criminal operations could be defeated by drivers who understood both their own defensive capabilities and their attackers' likely tactics. Today, Rodriguez continues to haul high-value cargo across America's highways, but his truck is equipped with countermeasures that would have been classified technology just a few years ago. His routes are planned with military-level operational security, and his communications include backup systems that can function even under electronic attack. Hidden in Rodriguez's cab is a tactical response manual developed with federal law enforcement, along with equipment that goes far beyond standard trucking safety gear. The message is clear. When foreign intelligence services use military tactics to steal American technology, drivers need military-level training and equipment to protect it. For commercial drivers hauling sensitive cargo through America's most isolated corridors, Rodriguez's experience has become required study. The lesson is sobering. Sometimes the greatest threats to national security come not from obvious enemies but from sophisticated operations that exploit the trust and predictability of legitimate transportation networks. The convoy on I-40 represented a new category of threat that combined traditional highway robbery with state-sponsored industrial espionage. Rodriguez's refusal to become a victim not only saved his own life, but protected technology that maintains America's military advantages in an increasingly dangerous world. As federal investigators noted in their final report, Mr. Rodriguez's actions prevented the compromise of sensitive technology and exposed an operation that posed significant threats to national security. His survival demonstrated that properly trained and equipped commercial drivers represent a crucial defense against sophisticated attacks on America's transportation infrastructure. The desert highways are still long and empty. The cargo still needs to move, and drivers still cross the isolated spaces where help is hours away. But since August 3, 2020, those who haul America's most sensitive freight drive with the knowledge that sometimes the lights in their mirrors belong to enemies of the United States, and the most important delivery they can make is getting that cargo safely to its destination. Patricia Valdez had stopped at the Desert Winds Truck Plaza exactly 4 times in the past 8 months, enough to know the rhythm of the place like a familiar song. The facility served long-haul drivers crossing the brutal stretch of Interstate 10 between Las Cruces and El Paso, offering basic amenities with the no-nonsense efficiency that professional drivers appreciated more than comfort. But at 11:30 p.m. on this cold November night, something in that familiar rhythm had changed. The 34-year-old trucker from Phoenix couldn't identify exactly what felt different, only that the atmosphere carried an undercurrent of wrongness that set her nerves on edge. Valdez pulled her Freightliner into a parking space at the lot's far end, following security protocols developed through 11 years of professional driving. Company policy required female drivers to take enhanced precautions at isolated facilities, procedures that had become standard practice after several high-profile attacks on women truckers in recent years. The parking lot appeared normal. 18-wheelers lined up in orderly rows, diesel engines idling to maintain climate control during mandatory rest periods. The diner's neon sign flickered against the desert darkness, casting familiar patterns of red and blue light across the asphalt. As Valdez climbed down from her cab, she noticed the first detail that disrupted the expected pattern. Jerry Hoffman, the lot attendant who normally spent his shift emptying trash bins and checking for obvious maintenance issues, was speaking into a handheld radio while observing the truck parking areas with unusual intensity. Valdez had seen Hoffman during her previous stops and knew his routine. He was a conscientious worker who maintained the facility's cleanliness and security, but he'd never carried radio equipment or demonstrated interest in monitoring specific vehicles. Tonight, his behavior suggested surveillance rather than maintenance. The second anomaly was more subtle, but equally troubling. Several trucks that had been parked when she arrived were running with their marker lights activated, but no interior illumination visible in their cabs. Professional drivers didn't normally leave their vehicles unattended with engines running, especially at facilities known for cargo theft. Valdez locked her truck and walked toward the diner, mentally cataloging other irregularities that didn't fit the familiar pattern. The security cameras she'd noticed during previous visits seemed to be positioned differently, with better angles on the truck parking areas. The usual cluster of drivers gathered around the coffee station was absent, replaced by an atmosphere of subdued tension. Inside the diner, the wrongness became more apparent. Two drivers sat at the counter, but they weren't engaging in the typical conversation that filled truck stop diners during overnight hours. Instead, they ate in silence, occasionally glancing toward the windows that overlooked the parking lot with expressions of suppressed anxiety. "Coffee to go," Valdez told the waitress, a woman named Carol who'd been friendly during previous visits. Tonight, Carol barely made eye contact, her usual chattiness replaced by nervous efficiency. "How's the road east?" Valdez asked, testing the atmosphere. "Fine," came the clipped response. "Cream and sugar?" The absence of normal conversation was another warning sign. Truck stop workers built their livelihood on relationships with regular customers, sharing information about traffic conditions, weather forecasts, and law enforcement activity. Carol's reluctance to engage suggested either personal problems or external pressure that was affecting the entire facility. Valdez paid for her coffee and returned to the parking area, senses heightened by the accumulation of small wrongnesses that didn't match her expectations. 11 years of professional driving had taught her to trust instincts about dangerous situations, and those instincts were broadcasting warnings about everything she'd observed. As she approached her truck, a man emerged from the shadows between two trailers. He was dressed appropriately for the location: jeans, work boots, baseball cap, but something about his posture and movement suggested unfamiliarity with physical labor. "Excuse me, miss," he called out in an accent that didn't match regional dialect patterns. "Having some trouble with my rig, wondering if you might take a look." The approach was textbook. appeal for professional assistance from one driver to another. But several details triggered Valdez's alarm systems. His hands showed no evidence of mechanical work, his boots lacked wear patterns consistent with truck driving, and he'd approached from an area where she hadn't observed any vehicles with obvious problems. "What kind of trouble?" she asked, maintaining distance while scanning for additional threats. "Engine problems," he replied, gesturing vaguely toward a truck 2 rows away. "Maybe you've seen it before." Valdez followed his indication to a vehicle that appeared mechanically sound. No warning lights or distress signals visible. Either this man was confused about basic trucking operations, or he was lying about needing mechanical assistance. "I'm not much of a mechanic," she replied, backing toward her truck. "You might try the service desk inside." The man's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, friendly concern replaced by calculation. "Sure thing, thanks anyway." But instead of walking toward the service desk, he moved in the opposite direction, toward a group of men gathered near the parking lot's exit. Valdez couldn't hear their conversation, but their body language suggested coordination rather than casual interaction. She climbed into her cab and engaged the locks, mind racing through threat assessment protocols learned during company security training. Multiple individuals with unknown intentions, isolated location, irregular staff behavior, vehicles positioned for potential blocking maneuvers. Every indicator pointed toward organized criminal activity. Valdez started her engine and began backing out of the parking space, planning to relocate to a more secure facility. But as she maneuvered toward the exit, 2 trucks moved to block her path while their drivers coordinated movements via handheld radios. Her CB radio crackled with an incoming transmission. "Freightliner with the Colorado plates, shut down your engine and step out of the vehicle." The voice was calm and authoritative, carrying the tone of assumed command. But legitimate law enforcement didn't communicate with commercial drivers via CB radio, didn't operate from truck stops without proper identification, and didn't use commercial vehicles to detain suspects. Valdez keyed her microphone. "Identify yourself and your authority." The response confirmed her worst fears. "This is routine inspection. Cooperation is required. No badge numbers, no agency identification, no legal basis for the detention." This was organized crime disguised as law enforcement, a technique that exploited drivers' trained compliance with authority figures. Valdez activated her truck's satellite communication system and began broadcasting a priority distress signal while simultaneously transmitting on CB radio. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Freightliner Unit 47 at Desert Winds Truck Plaza, requesting immediate law enforcement assistance. Multiple subjects impersonating police officers, kidnapping attempt in progress." The response was immediate chaos. The trucks blocking her exit began aggressive maneuvering, while armed figures ran toward her position. But Valdez had advantages her attackers hadn't anticipated. A fully loaded truck with superior mass and momentum, defensive driving training, and 15 years of experience navigating challenging situations. She shifted into gear and accelerated directly toward the gap between blocking vehicles. Her 80,000-pound truck had enough kinetic energy to push through most obstacles, and the criminals had underestimated the physics involved in stopping a determined commercial driver. Metal crashed against metal as Valdez's truck shouldered aside one blocking vehicle and broke through the improvised barrier. She was clear of the immediate trap, but far from safe, as her CB radio erupted with urgent transmissions from the criminal organization, their professional composure replaced by frantic coordination in multiple languages. What followed was a 43-mile pursuit across the New Mexico desert, with Valdez maintaining communication with federal authorities while multiple vehicles attempted to intercept her route. The criminals demonstrated resources she hadn't expected: helicopters, high-performance vehicles, and communication equipment that allowed sophisticated tactical coordination. But they had made a crucial error in targeting Patricia Valdez. Before becoming a commercial driver, she had served 8 years in the Marine Corps, including deployments where convoy security meant the difference between life and death. She understood defensive driving, tactical communication, and how to use her vehicle's capabilities as weapons when necessary. The pursuit ended when FBI tactical units surrounded the criminal network at a roadblock near the Texas border. The investigation that followed revealed the scope of an operation that had been using American truck stops as hunting grounds for human trafficking victims. The Desert Winds Truck Plaza was owned through shell companies by an international trafficking organization that specialized in capturing women who could disappear for days before anyone noticed they were missing. The facility had been equipped with sophisticated surveillance equipment, and staff members had been either compromised or replaced with developed sophisticated methods for selecting victims, using psychological profiles to identify women who were traveling alone, had limited family connections, or worked irregular schedules that would delay missing person reports. They had studied commercial transportation patterns to identify optimal locations for recruitment operations. Most disturbing was the discovery that the organization had been testing their methods for months before expanding operations. Valdez's encounter at Desert Winds was part of a systematic effort to refine kidnapping techniques and improve success rates for future operations. For Patricia Valdez, the experience became a turning point that transformed her from a transportation professional into a national advocate for commercial driver safety and human trafficking awareness. She began working with federal authorities to identify indicators that truck stops might be compromised by criminal organizations. Her recommendations focused on environmental awareness and behavioral observation, unusual staff behavior, modified facility layouts, irregular vehicle traffic, and coordination patterns that suggested criminal activity rather than legitimate business operations. The Desert Winds incident led to enhanced security protocols at truck stops nationwide, including improved lighting, expanded camera coverage, and regular security audits designed to detect criminal infiltration. Valdez's survival and escape had exposed a threat that affected not just commercial drivers, but vulnerable women throughout the transportation industry. Today, Valdez continues to drive long-haul freight across America's highways, but her routes are planned with security considerations that would have been unnecessary before her encounter with the trafficking network. Her truck is equipped with enhanced communication systems and tracking devices that provide the real-time location updates to multiple monitoring centers. Hidden in her cab is a comprehensive safety manual she developed with federal law enforcement, including recognition signs for compromised facilities and emergency procedures for escaping organized criminal attacks. The message is clear. When criminal organizations exploit America's transportation infrastructure for human trafficking, drivers need training that goes beyond traditional safety protocols. For female truckers crossing America's most isolated highways, Valdez's experience has become required reading and training material. The lesson is sobering. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are those who understand how to make their hunting grounds look exactly like places where travelers should feel safe. The true horror of the Desert Winds incident lies not in what happened to one driver, but in the systematic nature of an operation that used America's trucking infrastructure to traffic human beings across international borders. The criminals had studied transportation patterns, driver behavior, and facility operations to create an efficient system for identifying and capturing victims. The trafficking network had been escalating their operations systematically, beginning with surveillance and intelligence gathering before moving to active recruitment and kidnapping. Valdez's encounter represented a critical moment when the organization was transitioning from preparation to full-scale operations that would have affected hundreds of victims. Federal investigators later determined that the Desert Winds facility had been compromised for over 18 months, during which time the trafficking organization had been perfecting their methods and expanding their network. The rescue operations that followed Valdez's escape prevented what would have become one of the largest human trafficking operations ever discovered in the United States. For those who drive America's highways, particularly women traveling alone through isolated areas, the lesson of Desert Winds is both a warning and a source of hope. Criminal organizations may be sophisticated and well-resourced, but they can be defeated by drivers who trust their instincts, understand threat recognition, and refuse to become victims. As Valdez often tells audiences during her safety presentations, the most important cargo any of us carries is ourselves, and the most crucial delivery we make is getting home safely to our families. Trust your gut, question everything that feels wrong, and never forget that help is just a radio call away, if you're brave enough to make that call. The truck stops are still open, the highways still busy with commercial traffic, and drivers still need places to rest and refuel during long journeys across America. But since November 12, 2021, those facilities operate under enhanced security protocols designed to prevent criminal infiltration, and drivers approach them with heightened awareness that sometimes the greatest dangers hide behind facades of helpful hospitality. The call came at 11:43 p.m. on a Thursday that David Sterling would never forget, crackling through his truck's satellite communication system with the kind of manufactured urgency that 23 years of professional driving had taught him to question. Sterling was completing his logbook entries at a rest stop near Valdosta when his dispatcher's voice interrupted the quiet Georgia night. "Sterling, we need you to deadhead to Atlanta immediately. Emergency pickup for Meridian Industries. Their regular driver had an accident near Tifton. Client is screaming about delivery deadlines and threatening to cancel the contract." Sterling checked his hours of service carefully. He was legal to drive, but barely. Perhaps 5 hours before mandatory rest would be required. Atlanta was 4 hours away if traffic cooperated, which it rarely did through Georgia's perpetual construction zones and unpredictable weather patterns. "What kind of accident?" Sterling asked, noting details that might affect his route planning and delivery schedule. Driver injuries could mean delays for accident investigation and medical response. Vehicle damage might indicate road hazards or cleanup operations that would slow traffic. "Single vehicle incident," came the reply. Driver walked away, but the truck's totaled. Load scattered across both lanes. They're still cleaning up electronics components. State Patrol has traffic diverted around the scene. Electronics. Sterling made mental notes about cargo handling requirements. Sensitive to moisture and physical damage, valuable enough to attract thieves, required careful loading and secured transport. Standard freight for Meridian Industries, a company specializing in prototype technology for defense contractors. What his dispatcher hadn't mentioned, and what Sterling wouldn't discover until much later, was that the accident near Tifton was the fourth incident involving Meridian Industries cargo in the past 3 months. Federal investigators were already questioning whether the pattern represented systematic industrial espionage disguised as transportation mishaps. Sterling arrived at the Meridian facility in Atlanta at 3:17 a.m. The loading dock was illuminated by harsh security lights that cast deep shadows across the industrial complex, creating an atmosphere of urgency that didn't match the routine nature of most cargo transfers he'd handled for the company. The security guard who met him at the facility's main gate was unfamiliar. Sterling didn't recognize him from previous deliveries to Meridian. The man's uniform appeared correct, and his credentials seemed legitimate. But something about his demeanor suggested incomplete familiarity with standard security protocols. "You're here for the emergency pickup," the guard stated rather than asked, consulting a clipboard that seemed unnecessarily detailed for a simple cargo transfer operation. "That's right," Sterling confirmed. "Headed to Norfolk. Should be straightforward." The guard made extensive notes on his clipboard before directing Sterling to loading Dock 7, explaining that the cargo was already prepared and waiting for immediate departure. The urgency was unusual. Most Meridian shipments involved careful documentation and security procedures that typically required substantial time to complete properly. At the loading dock, Sterling encountered additional irregularities that didn't match his experience with previous Meridian operations. The cargo consisted of 8 identical crates, each marked with shipping labels, identifying the contents as computer components. Handle with care. But the crates themselves appeared wrong somehow. Too new, too uniform, like theatrical props rather than actual shipping containers. The loading supervisor, another unfamiliar face in Sterling's experience with the company, seemed anxious to complete the transfer operation quickly. "Client's been calling every hour," he explained, while directing forklift operators to position the crates in Sterling's trailer. "Some kind of critical deadline for a government contract." Sterling signed the necessary paperwork, noting that the shipping manifest was significantly simpler than usual for sensitive cargo. Normally, Meridian shipments included detailed tracking requirements, security protocols, and handling instructions. This manifest was basic, almost generic in its simplicity. As he prepared to depart the facility, Sterling's accumulated experience with Meridian's procedures triggered warning signals. The company was notorious for thorough documentation and extensive security measures. Emergency shipments typically involved enhanced protocols rather than simplified procedures. He decided to verify the pickup authorization with his regular contact at Meridian, a shipping coordinator named Janet Morrison, who had handled his deliveries for 3 years. Morrison would be able to confirm whether the emergency was legitimate. Additional security instructions if required. Sterling's call went directly to voicemail. "You've reached Janet Morrison at Meridian Industries. I'm currently on vacation until April 23rd. For urgent shipping matters, please contact the duty supervisor." The dates didn't align correctly. April 14th was Thursday, and Morrison's message indicated she wouldn't return until the following Tuesday. But Sterling had been told the emergency resulted from an accident that had occurred earlier that evening, requiring immediate cargo replacement. Someone had provided inaccurate information about the timeline, the urgency, or both. Sterling returned to the loading dock but found it completely deserted. The supervisor who had coordinated his cargo transfer was gone, along with the forklift operators and security personnel. Even the gate guard had disappeared, leaving Sterling alone with 8 crates of computer components that might not be what they appeared to be. He returned to his truck and used the satellite communication system to contact Meridian's main switchboard. The automated message indicated that offices were closed until 8 a.m., with emergency contacts available for urgent situations. But when Sterling called the emergency number, he reached a voicemail system that didn't match Meridian's usual professional presentation standards. The situation contained too many inconsistencies to ignore. Sterling activated his truck's comprehensive camera system and began documenting the cargo, the facility, and his communication attempts. If something was wrong with this shipment, he needed evidence to protect himself from criminal or civil liability. His documentation revealed details he had missed during the loading process. The crates bore shipping labels with Meridian's logo and contact information, but the labels themselves appeared freshly printed. Too clean, too perfect, without the wear patterns typical of crates that had been prepared and stored according to normal shipping procedures. More troubling was his discovery that the route instructions directed him to a facility in Norfolk that wasn't Meridian's usual destination. Sterling had delivered to Norfolk multiple times and knew the correct address from memory. The instructions he'd been given would take him to an industrial area he had never visited. Sterling made a decision that would later be described as both professionally risky and personally crucial. Instead of proceeding with the questionable delivery, he drove to a 24-hour truck stop and parked where he could observe his trailer while researching the discrepancies he had discovered. Using his laptop and the truck stop's Wi-Fi connection, Sterling accessed Meridian Industries' website and employee directory. Janet Morrison was listed as the primary shipping coordinator, exactly as he remembered. But when he called her direct office number, he reached an answering service indicating she was indeed on vacation and unavailable for urgent matters. The emergency pickup that supposedly resulted from an accident involving Morrison's regular driver had been scheduled while Morrison was on vacation, timing that would have made it impossible for her to coordinate any shipment, emergency or otherwise. Sterling's research revealed additional problems. The Norfolk facility listed in his route instructions didn't appear in Meridian's official facility directory. The emergency contact number he'd been given connected to a voicemail system with a generic greeting that mentioned no company name or specific contact information. Someone had orchestrated an elaborate deception to obtain custody of 8 crates of cargo using Sterling's legitimate transportation credentials and Meridian's established shipping protocols. But the cargo itself remained a mystery. Computer components that might represent legitimate technology, or might be something significantly more valuable and dangerous. Sterling's military experience from his Navy service included familiarity with security protocols for sensitive technology shipments. The irregularities he had discovered suggested either industrial espionage or theft of classified materials, both federal crimes that would make him an unwitting accomplice if he proceeded with the unauthorized delivery. At 6:30 a.m., Sterling made a series of calls that would transform a transportation problem into a major federal investigation. First, he contacted Meridian Industries' security department, reaching a duty officer who confirmed that no emergency shipments had been authorized during Morrison's vacation period. Second, he called federal authorities to report suspected cargo theft involving potentially classified materials. The response was immediate and overwhelming. FBI agents arrived at the truck stop within 45 minutes, followed by representatives from multiple federal agencies with interest in the cargo Sterling was carrying. The investigation that followed revealed one of the most sophisticated industrial espionage operations discovered in recent American history. The accident near Tifton had been staged to create justification for an emergency cargo transfer. The Meridian facility, where Sterling had collected the cargo, had been temporarily compromised by operatives who had gained access through cyber attacks on the company's scheduling and security systems. The 8 crates contained prototype semiconductor technology worth an estimated $93 million. Components for next-generation military communication systems that several foreign governments would pay enormous sums to acquire through illegal channels. The theft had been planned and executed with precision that suggested state-sponsored industrial espionage rather than common criminal activity. Sterling's decision to question the inconsistencies he had observed prevented the technology from reaching its intended destination, a shipping facility controlled by foreign intelligence operatives who would have transported it outside the United States within hours of delivery. The federal investigation expanded to include comprehensive cybersecurity reviews of all defense contractors involved in sensitive technology development, enhanced background checks for personnel with access to classified shipping information, and new protocols for verifying emergency cargo transfers. Sterling's experience demonstrated how sophisticated adversaries could exploit normal transportation procedures to steal classified materials while using legitimate drivers as unwitting accomplices in operations that threatened national security. For David Sterling, the incident became a career-defining moment that transformed him from a transportation professional into a national security consultant. He began working with federal authorities to identify vulnerabilities in technology shipping procedures, sharing his observations with other drivers through enhanced security training programs. His recommendations focused on verification procedures, confirming pickup authorizations through multiple independent channels, questioning unusual urgency in sensitive shipments, and maintaining detailed documentation of irregular procedures that didn't match established company protocols. The lesson was clear. Professional drivers handling valuable cargo needed training in security awareness and threat recognition as much as transportation safety and mechanical maintenance. The Meridian Industries security breach led to enhanced protocols for technology shipments throughout the defense industry and improved coordination between commercial carriers and federal security agencies. Sterling's quick thinking and professional skepticism had prevented a significant breach of national security while demonstrating the crucial role individual drivers play in protecting America's technological advantages. The investigation revealed that foreign intelligence services had been systematically targeting American defense contractors, using sophisticated cyber attacks to identify valuable technology shipments and then exploiting transportation networks to steal classified materials. Sterling's cargo represented just one operation in a campaign that had been ongoing for several years. Most disturbing was the discovery that the foreign operatives had infiltrated multiple shipping companies, gaining access to manifests, route information, and driver schedules that allowed them to plan theft operations with inside knowledge of security procedures and timing. Today, Sterling continues to haul sensitive cargo across America's highways, but his approach to documentation and verification has been forever changed by his experience with the false emergency pickup. His truck is equipped with enhanced security systems, and his routes are planned with operational security measures that were unnecessary just a few years ago. Hidden in his cab is a laminated verification checklist for unusual shipments, along with emergency contact numbers for reporting suspected security breaches to federal authorities. The message is simple but crucial. Question everything, document everything, and trust professional instincts over external pressure. For commercial drivers handling valuable or sensitive cargo, Sterling's experience serves as both a warning and an operational guide. The lesson is sobering. Sometimes the most dangerous threats to national security come not from obvious enemies but from sophisticated deceptions that exploit the trust and professionalism of those who keep America's economy and defense capabilities moving. The true horror of Sterling's experience lies not in immediate personal danger, but in the realization that foreign adversaries understand America's transportation infrastructure well enough to exploit it for stealing the technology that maintains our national defense capabilities and economic competitiveness. For those who drive America's highways carrying the cargo that powers our economy and protects our national interests, the responsibility extends far beyond safe delivery. It includes vigilance against those who would use our own systems against us, and the courage to question authority when something doesn't feel right. Kenneth Walsh approached the portable way station with the resigned acceptance of a driver who had navigated the bureaucratic maze of commercial vehicle enforcement for 28 years. The temporary setup on I-35 just south of Salina appeared routine. A collection of trailers positioned on the highway shoulder, portable scales, and the familiar signs directing commercial vehicles to mandatory inspection. What distinguished this enforcement operation from the dozens Walsh had encountered was the timing. In his 5 years of monthly runs through Kansas, random enforcement operations typically occurred during daylight hours, when visibility and safety conditions were optimal for detailed vehicle inspections. A roadside way station operating at 2:30 a.m. in sub-freezing temperatures represented an unusual deployment of limited enforcement resources. The 46-year-old trucker from Topeka was hauling agricultural machinery parts from Kansas City to Dallas, routine cargo that he had transported dozens of times without incident. His truck and trailer were properly maintained according to federal regulations, his logbooks were current and accurate, and his cargo was secured according to Department of Transportation standards. A legitimate inspection would find no violations worth citing, but as Walsh guided his Freightliner onto the portable scales, details began accumulating that suggested this operation might not represent routine regulatory enforcement. The first anomaly was equipment sophistication. Portable weigh stations typically used simplified scale systems designed for basic weight verification and safety compliance checks. The setup, Walsh observed, included electronic monitoring equipment that seemed excessive for standard compliance verification, along with computer terminals that suggested capabilities beyond routine enforcement needs. The second concern was personnel composition. The inspection team consisted of 7 individuals wearing Kansas Department of Transportation uniforms, but their ages, physical conditioning, and coordination patterns suggested backgrounds in military or law enforcement rather than transportation regulation. Most troubling was their tactical precision. They moved with coordination, typical of people accustomed to operations that required synchronized timing and predetermined positioning. "Engine off. Step out of the vehicle," commanded the lead inspector, a man in his 30s whose uniform bore sergeant's stripes but no name tag. Routine safety and compliance inspection. Walsh complied with the directive, noting that the inspector's request didn't follow standard protocols he had experienced hundreds of times. Normal inspections began with document verification, driver's license, medical certificates, logbooks, and shipping manifests. Physical inspection of vehicles typically came later, after establishing driver credentials and cargo authorization. "Your bills of lading and manifest," the inspector demanded, extending a gloved hand. Walsh noticed the gloves were tactical style rather than standard work gloves issued to transportation enforcement personnel. Another detail that didn't match routine regulatory operations. As Walsh retrieved his paperwork, he observed activity around his truck that raised additional concerns. 2 inspectors were connecting electronic devices to his vehicle's diagnostic ports, equipment that could download comprehensive operational data from the truck's computer systems. Another inspector was photographing his cargo with professional-grade camera equipment that exceeded standard documentation requirements. "Problem with your load classification," the lead inspector announced after examining Walsh's manifest. "Need to verify contents and weight distribution. Standard procedure for compliance verification." But it wasn't standard procedure. Walsh had hauled similar machinery parts dozens of times, understood the inspection requirements for his specific cargo type, and knew the regulatory framework governing agricultural equipment transportation. The level of scrutiny his shipment was receiving suggested either serious regulatory violations he wasn't aware of, or interests that extended beyond routine compliance verification. "What specific violations are you identifying?" Walsh asked, exercising his right to understand the legal basis for extended inspection procedures. The inspector's response was evasive and unsatisfying. "Just completing our due diligence assessment. Shouldn't take more than 90 minutes if everything checks out properly." 90 minutes was far longer than necessary for standard weight and safety verification procedures. Walsh's extensive experience with legitimate inspections indicated that something beyond routine enforcement was occurring at this portable facility. As the inspection continued, Walsh noticed additional irregularities that didn't match his experience with legitimate enforcement operations. The portable scales were connected to computer systems that appeared to be downloading data rather than simply measuring vehicle weight. The inspectors were asking detailed questions about his route history, customer relationships, and cargo scheduling that went beyond regulatory requirements for compliance verification. Most disturbing was his discovery that the inspection team was photographing not just his cargo, but his truck's interior systems, communication equipment, and logbook entries. They were gathering comprehensive intelligence about his transportation operations rather than verifying compliance with safety and weight regulations. Walsh's military experience from his Army service in the 1990s provided a framework for understanding what he was observing. This represented intelligence gathering disguised as law enforcement activity, conducted by personnel who understood both transportation regulations and surveillance techniques, but weren't necessarily legitimate enforcement officers. "I need to contact my dispatcher," Walsh announced, reaching for his cell phone. Company policy requires notification when inspections exceed standard duration or scope. "No communications during active inspection," the lead inspector replied sharply. "Interference with law enforcement operations is a federal offense." The prohibition on communication confirmed Walsh's suspicions about the operation's legitimacy. Legitimate inspections didn't prevent drivers from contacting their employers about delays, and interference with law enforcement was a serious accusation that required specific legal justification and procedural documentation. Walsh had been targeted for reasons that extended beyond routine compliance verification, and the inspection team was operating with claimed authority that might exceed their actual legal powers. His CB radio, which had been monitoring Channel 19 throughout the enforcement stop, suddenly crackled with an incoming transmission. "Any drivers on I-35 southbound, be advised there's some kind of enforcement action at mile marker 252. Might want to consider alternate routing if possible." The warning came from another trucker, but the timing seemed suspicious. Walsh had been monitoring CB traffic since approaching the way station and hadn't heard any previous reports about enforcement operations in the area. Someone was broadcasting information about his specific situation, possibly as part of the same operation that had targeted his vehicle. Walsh keyed his microphone carefully. "Breaker 19, this is the freightliner at the inspection site. Can you provide more details about the enforcement action? Are other drivers experiencing significant delays?" The response was immediate and concerning. "Negative on other delays, driver. Just heard chatter about your specific location. You might want to wrap up your business there quickly." The CB transmission confirmed that Walsh's situation was being monitored by people who weren't part of the inspection team. Either other truckers were maintaining unusually close surveillance of enforcement actions, or the operation included external monitoring elements that extended beyond the roadside facility. As the inspection entered its second hour, Walsh made a decision that would later be characterized as both professionally risky and personally crucial. He activated his truck's emergency beacon system, a satellite-based distress signal that would alert his company's security department and federal authorities to his location in unusual circumstances. The response from the inspection team was immediate and revealing. The lead inspector demanded to know what communication devices Walsh had activated, while other team members began disconnecting their equipment and preparing to conclude the inspection operation. "Just standard company tracking protocols," Walsh replied calmly, but the damage to their operation was apparent. The inspection team's reaction confirmed that they were conducting unauthorized activities rather than legitimate regulatory enforcement. Within 30 minutes, the portable way station was being rapidly disassembled and loaded onto trucks for immediate transport. The inspection team's efficiency in packing sophisticated equipment suggested extensive experience with mobile operations that needed to be relocated quickly when circumstances changed. Walsh was released with a written citation for minor logbook discrepancies, violations so trivial that they would normally result in warnings rather than formal citations. The citation provided legal justification for the extended stop while concealing the true purpose of the 2-hour intelligence-gathering operation. The federal investigation that followed Walsh's emergency beacon activation revealed disturbing details about corruption within Kansas transportation enforcement agencies and criminal exploitation of legitimate regulatory procedures. The portable weigh station had been operated by personnel who possessed legitimate law enforcement credentials but were working for private security contractors with documented connections to foreign intelligence services, seeking information about American commercial transportation networks. The sophisticated equipment Walsh had observed was designed to extract comprehensive data from commercial vehicles' computer systems. Detailed information about cargo routes, shipping schedules, customer relationships, and security protocols that could be used for industrial espionage or criminal targeting of valuable shipments. Walsh's truck had been selected because his regular routes included deliveries to defense contractors and technology companies whose shipping patterns were of significant interest to foreign adversaries seeking intelligence about American commercial and military capabilities. The inspection operation was designed to gather systematic intelligence about American commercial shipping networks without triggering the security protocols that would have detected direct cyber attacks on transportation companies or their information systems. The investigation expanded to include reviews of similar enforcement operations across multiple states. Within 6 months, federal authorities had identified and shut down 19 unauthorized surveillance operations disguised as routine traffic enforcement, operated by personnel with legitimate credentials who were selling intelligence to foreign interests. For Kenneth Walsh, the experience became a turning point in his understanding of how foreign intelligence services target America's transportation infrastructure for systematic exploitation. He began working with federal authorities to identify indicators that enforcement operations might be compromised by criminal or foreign interests. His recommendations focused on verification procedures for unusual enforcement encounters, questioning enforcement timing and location that didn't match normal patterns, recognizing equipment that exceeded standard inspection requirements, and maintaining communication with employers despite pressure from supposed law enforcement personnel. The lesson was clear. Sophisticated adversaries understood that America's commercial transportation system carried intelligence value that extended far beyond simple cargo theft, and they were willing to invest significant resources in gathering systematic information about shipping patterns, routes, and security procedures. Today, Walsh continues to drive his regular routes across America's highways, but his approach to law enforcement encounters has been forever changed by his experience with the unauthorized intelligence-gathering operation. His truck is equipped with enhanced security systems, and his company has implemented protocols for verifying the legitimacy of unusual enforcement stops. Hidden in his cab is a laminated reference card with contact numbers for verifying law enforcement credentials and reporting suspicious enforcement activities to federal authorities. The message is simple but crucial. Trust but verify. Document everything, and remember that legitimate authorities welcome verification of their credentials. For commercial drivers crossing America's highways carrying cargo that powers the economy and supports national defense, Walsh's experience serves as a warning that sometimes the greatest threats to transportation security come from those who wear the right uniforms and carry the right credentials while serving entirely the wrong masters. The true horror of the unauthorized weigh station operation lies not in immediate personal danger, but in the systematic nature of intelligence gathering, designed to exploit drivers' natural compliance with law enforcement authority. For those who drive America's highways carrying cargo that maintains our economic competitiveness and national security, the lesson is sobering. Sometimes the people who look most like protectors are actually predators, and survival depends on the courage to question authority when circumstances don't feel legitimate. The portable way station on I-35 represented a new category of threat that combined traditional criminal corruption with foreign intelligence operations targeting American transportation infrastructure. Walsh's refusal to accept the situation at face value exposed an operation that posed significant threats to both commercial drivers and national security interests. As federal investigators noted in their classified report, Mr. Walsh's actions prevented the compromise of sensitive transportation intelligence and exposed a systematic operation that represented a clear threat to American commercial and military logistics capabilities. His vigilance demonstrated that properly trained commercial drivers represent a crucial early warning system against foreign intelligence operations targeting our transportation infrastructure. The breakdown came at exactly the worst possible moment in exactly the worst possible place, which was how Anthony Carter knew it wasn't really a breakdown at all. The 52-year-old veteran driver from Denver had been hauling automotive parts through the treacherous mountain passes of Colorado for over 2 decades, and mechanical failures that occurred with such perfect timing inevitably had human causes rather than mechanical ones. Carter was navigating the dangerous descent through Eisenhower Pass when his Peterbilt's engine began losing power systematically, forcing him to nurse the struggling truck toward the chain-up area at the tunnel's western approach. The location was notorious among truckers, 11,200 feet of elevation where December weather could turn deadly within minutes, and where help might be hours away even under ideal conditions. His immediate concern should have been safety and mechanical diagnosis. The chain-up area provided temporary refuge from highway traffic, but Colorado mountain weather in December was unforgiving to stranded travelers. His CB radio was already crackling with reports of an approaching storm system that would bring heavy snow and life-threatening temperatures within hours. But Carter's military training from his Marine Corps service 20 years earlier had taught him to observe details that others might miss, and what he observed as he performed engine diagnostics made his blood run cold. A white panel van had pulled into the far end of the chain-up area, approximately 30 seconds after his truck had lost power. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. The van had been following him and was now positioning for whatever came next. 2 men emerged from the van and began unloading equipment that seemed excessive for winter travel preparation. Carter recognized some of the items from his military experience: sophisticated communication devices, what appeared to be medical equipment, and several large cases whose contents weren't immediately obvious but suggested serious preparation for extended operations. The approaching winter storm provided perfect cover for criminal activity. Eisenhower Pass in December was one of America's most isolated major highways, where stranded travelers could face life-threatening conditions within hours, and where legitimate rescue operations would be delayed or impossible until weather conditions improved. Carter completed his engine diagnosis and confirmed his worst suspicions: a severed fuel line that had been deliberately cut and temporarily reattached to allow normal operation for a predetermined distance before pressure caused the connection to fail. This wasn't mechanical failure. It was sabotage designed to strand him at a specific location. He reached for his satellite communication system to call for assistance, but discovered that his signal was being actively jammed. The device showed full reception strength but couldn't establish connections to his dispatcher or emergency services. Someone was using military-grade electronic countermeasures to isolate the area from outside communication. The realization transformed Carter's situation from mechanical emergency to immediate survival threat. Communication jamming required sophisticated equipment and specialized knowledge of electronic warfare techniques. The men at the van weren't stranded motorists. They were professionals, implementing a carefully planned operation that required isolation and controlled circumstances. Carter's CB radio remained functional, operating on frequencies that weren't being jammed by their equipment. He switched to Channel 9, the emergency frequency monitored by law enforcement and emergency services, and began broadcasting his situation with military precision. Emergency, emergency. This is a stranded commercial vehicle operator at Eisenhower Pass chain-up area requesting immediate assistance. Engine sabotage, communications jammed, hostile activity in progress. The response came not from emergency services, but from one of the men at the van, speaking through a handheld radio. Commercial vehicle operator, please identify yourself and your cargo manifest. We're conducting a federal inspection of this area. The voice was authoritative and professional, but completely fraudulent. Federal inspectors didn't conduct operations in remote mountain locations during severe weather conditions, didn't use communication jamming equipment, and didn't identify themselves through CB radio transmissions. Carter keyed his microphone with military calm. Identify your agency and legal authority. Provide badge numbers and supervisor contact information immediately. The response was immediate and revealed the true nature of the situation. Compliance is required. Exit your vehicle immediately for inspection. No legitimate federal agent would refuse to provide identification or legal authority for their actions. Carter was being targeted by criminals who understood both electronic warfare techniques and impersonation of federal authority, but who had underestimated their target's military training and tactical awareness. His Marine Corps experience included extensive training in resistance to capture and exploitation. The first principle was maintaining distance from hostile forces while seeking assistance from legitimate authorities. But legitimate authorities were 40 miles away through mountain terrain that was becoming impassable as the storm system arrived. Carter's truck provided some protection, but it also made him a stationary target. The criminals had equipment and mobility advantages, while he was trapped by sabotage in an isolated location where rescue might not arrive for hours. He made a tactical decision that would later be called both militarily sound and personally heroic. Instead of waiting for the criminals to approach his defensive position, Carter used his truck's remaining mobility to take immediate offensive action. Starting his engine despite the fuel system damage, Carter drove his 80,000-pound truck directly toward the van at maximum speed his compromised engine could produce. The criminals had positioned themselves for surveillance and communication control, but they hadn't anticipated a disabled commercial vehicle being used as a kinetic weapon. The collision destroyed their van and scattered their sophisticated equipment across the chain-up area. Carter's truck sustained additional damage, but remained operational enough to provide defensive cover while he assessed the tactical situation. One of the men was seriously injured in the collision and appeared to be unconscious. His partner had taken cover behind concrete barriers designed to protect vehicles from avalanche debris, but was now trapped in a defensive position with limited options for escape or counterattack. What Carter discovered among the scattered equipment transformed his understanding of the threat he was facing and the scope of the criminal operation. The men had been operating a sophisticated kidnapping and extortion network that specifically targeted commercial drivers carrying valuable cargo in isolated mountain locations. Their equipment included medical restraints, pharmaceutical supplies for keeping victims sedated during extended captivity, and communication devices for coordinating with accomplices who would negotiate ransom payments with trucking companies while victims were held at remote locations. Carter's cargo manifest listed routine automotive parts, but his truck's registration indicated he worked for a company that regularly handled high-value electronics shipments for defense contractors. The criminals had studied his employment history and targeted him based on his potential value as a kidnapping victim and source of intelligence about valuable cargo shipments. they had planned to capture Carter, steal his truck and cargo, and hold him for ransom while using his vehicle to transport other stolen goods to buyers across international borders. The communication jamming was designed to prevent him from calling for help while they implemented their systematic plan. But Carter's military training and tactical decision-making had disrupted their operation before it could be fully implemented. The injured criminal required immediate medical attention that wasn't available at their remote location, while his partner was trapped in a defensive position with diminishing options, as the approaching storm threatened to make the location inaccessible to rescue operations. Carter used his truck's external public address system to broadcast surrender demands, while maintaining defensive positioning behind his vehicle. The approaching storm provided additional tactical pressure. Without proper shelter and cold weather equipment, exposure to sub-zero temperatures would be fatal within hours. The standoff lasted 87 minutes until Colorado State Patrol units reached the scene, alerted by Carter's emergency broadcasts before the communication jamming had been fully activated. The subsequent investigation revealed the scope of the criminal operation and the sophistication of their targeting and operational techniques. The kidnapping team had been targeting commercial drivers for 11 months, using electronic surveillance to identify valuable cargo shipments and selecting victims based on route analysis that identified isolated locations where crimes could be committed without immediate law enforcement response capabilities. Carter's cargo was secondary to their primary objective, capturing him for ransom while using his truck for transportation of goods stolen from other victims across a network that extended into Mexico and Canada. The operation combined traditional kidnapping techniques with modern surveillance technology and detailed knowledge of commercial transportation patterns and security vulnerabilities. The investigation expanded to include similar crimes across the Mountain West region, leading to the arrest of 17 individuals involved in a network that had been responsible for 12 kidnappings and millions of dollars in cargo theft. Carter's resistance and tactical response had broken a criminal organization that had been operating undetected across multiple states. For Anthony Carter, the experience became a defining moment that transformed his approach to highway safety and security awareness in isolated locations. He began working with law enforcement agencies to identify vulnerabilities that criminal organizations exploit when targeting commercial drivers in remote areas. His recommendations focused on tactical awareness, communication security, and aggressive response to criminal approach patterns. The lesson was clear. Sophisticated criminals understood how to exploit the isolation and predictability of commercial transportation to create opportunities for serious crimes against both drivers and cargo. Today, Carter continues to drive mountain routes across America's most challenging terrain, but his truck is equipped with enhanced security systems and multiple backup communication devices that can't be easily jammed by criminal organizations. His company has implemented new protocols for drivers operating in isolated areas, including regular check-ins and emergency response procedures that account for electronic warfare threats. Hidden in his cab is a tactical response manual he developed with federal law enforcement, along with emergency equipment that goes beyond standard trucking safety gear. The message is clear. When criminals use military-grade techniques and equipment, drivers need military-level training and tactical responses to survive. For commercial drivers crossing America's most isolated highways, particularly through mountain regions where weather and terrain create natural advantages for criminal operations, Carter's experience at Eisenhower Pass serves as both a warning and an operational guide. The lesson is sobering. Sometimes survival depends not on following standard safety protocols, but on breaking those protocols in ways that criminals don't expect, and having the tactical training to use whatever advantages are available when legitimate authorities are too far away to provide assistance. The true horror of Carter's engineered breakdown lies not in the mechanical sabotage that stranded him, but in the realization that sophisticated criminal organizations systematically study commercial transportation patterns to identify optimal opportunities for serious crimes against drivers and cargo. They understand driver behavior, route scheduling, communication capabilities, and the geographic isolation that makes certain highways particularly dangerous for those who travel them alone. Carter's military training and aggressive tactical response turned a potentially fatal kidnapping into a victory for law enforcement. But his experience raises disturbing questions about the vulnerability of commercial drivers to organized criminal enterprises that operate with military-level planning and equipment. As veteran mountain drivers often say about the Eisenhower Pass incident, Carter didn't just save his own life and cargo, he saved every driver who would have been targeted after him. The criminal network had been escalating both the sophistication and violence of their operations, and federal investigators estimated they would have claimed dozens more victims if their capabilities hadn't been broken by one Marine's refusal to become a victim. The mountains are still beautiful and challenging. The highways still essential to America's economy, and drivers still brave enough to cross them in all weather conditions. But since December 3, 2024, they drive with enhanced awareness that sometimes the most important cargo they carry is their own survival instincts, and the most crucial delivery they make is getting themselves home safely at the end of each challenging run. The first sign that something was catastrophically wrong came when Michael Anderson's credit card was declined at the Pilot truck stop in Rawlins, Wyoming, on a cold Thursday morning that would forever divide his life into before and after. The 41-year-old veteran driver from Sacramento had been using the same company credit card for fuel purchases across 11 states during his 3-week cross-country haul from California to New York, and the card had never shown even the slightest hiccup with the substantial credit limit his employer maintained for operational expenses. "Try running it again, please," Anderson told the cashier, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, whose name tag read Dorothy, and who seemed genuinely sympathetic to his predicament. Sometimes these magnetic strip readers get finicky, especially with cards that see a lot of use on the road. Dorothy swiped the card through the reader a second time, her weathered fingers handling the plastic with the practiced efficiency of someone who had processed thousands of similar transactions. The result was identical. Transaction declined, insufficient funds available. The small screen displayed the message with electronic indifference, as if it were announcing something as mundane as the outside temperature, rather than potentially derailing Anderson's carefully planned delivery schedule. Anderson felt the familiar knot of anxiety that every commercial driver experiences when routine operations suddenly become complicated by forces beyond their control. In 20 years of professional driving, he had built his reputation on reliability, punctuality, and the ability to solve problems quickly and efficiently. Being stranded at a truck stop because of payment issues was the kind of complication that could snowball into missed deliveries, angry customers, and damaged professional relationships. "Let me try my personal card," Anderson said, reaching for his wallet with the confidence of a man who had always maintained excellent credit and substantial financial reserves. But when he opened the well-worn leather billfold that had accompanied him on thousands of miles of highway travel, he discovered something that made his blood run cold and his hand shake with sudden recognition of disaster. His personal credit cards were missing. His driver's license was gone. His company identification card had vanished. His Social Security card, which he carried despite knowing the security risks, was nowhere to be found. Only his commercial driver's license remained in its designated slot, apparently overlooked by whoever had systematically removed every other piece of identification from his wallet. Anderson's mind raced through the possibilities with the methodical approach of someone accustomed to diagnosing mechanical problems under pressure. He was obsessively careful about wallet security, never leaving it unattended in his truck or exposing it unnecessarily during routine transactions. The wallet lived in his front pocket during the day and was locked in his cab's secure compartment during mandatory rest periods. The only time it had been out of his direct control was during his 10-hour rest break at the Little America truck stop near Green River, Wyoming, approximately 14 hours earlier. He had followed his standard security protocol to the letter, locking his wallet in the cab's reinforced security compartment, activating the truck's comprehensive alarm system, and parking in a well-lit area where his vehicle would remain visible to other drivers, facility security cameras, and passing law enforcement patrols. Someone had overcome multiple layers of sophisticated security measures to access his personal documents without leaving any obvious signs of forced entry, tampering, or security system activation. The violation felt personal and professional simultaneously, striking at both his financial stability and his carefully maintained reputation for security consciousness. "Sir, is there another way you can pay for the fuel?" Dorothy asked, her voice reflecting the awkward position created by Anderson's growing predicament. "I've got other customers waiting in line behind you, and my manager gets really upset when transactions take too long to resolve, especially during the morning rush." Anderson glanced at the fuel gauge display showing his purchase: 127 gallons of diesel fuel totaling $486.33. His tanks were nearly empty after the overnight drive through Wyoming's challenging terrain. His electronic logbook showed he was required to complete his delivery in New York within 16 hours to meet contractual obligations, and he was carrying automotive parts worth over $200,000 to customers who had specifically requested his services because of his 20-year track record of reliability and security. Being stranded at a truck stop because of financial problems would trigger a cascade of professional consequences that could damage his reputation permanently and cost him future contracts with the high-value clients who formed the backbone of his business. In the commercial transportation industry, word of payment problems or security breaches spread quickly through informal networks, and recovering from such damage could take years. "Let me make some phone calls and sort this out," Anderson said, stepping away from the counter to avoid holding up other customers while privately hoping this was nothing more than a computer glitch or temporary hold that could be resolved with a quick conversation. He used his cell phone to contact his bank's 24-hour customer service line, expecting to hear about some routine security measure that had temporarily frozen his accounts. The conversation with his bank revealed the true scope of the disaster he was facing. According to their records, Michael Anderson had been living it up in Las Vegas, Nevada during the past 48 hours, making substantial purchases that totaled over $18,000, and had systematically exhausted his credit limits across multiple accounts. "Sir, I'm showing charges for luxury hotel accommodations, high-end restaurant meals, casino gambling losses, retail purchases at expensive stores, and cash advances from multiple ATM machines," the customer service representative explained with the professional detachment of someone who delivered bad news dozens of times each day. "All transactions were properly authorized using your correct PIN numbers and valid identification, so our automated fraud detection systems didn't flag any of them as suspicious activity requiring additional verification." Anderson's carefully maintained location records proved conclusively that he had been hundreds of miles away from Las Vegas during the entire time frame when the fraudulent charges were made. His truck's GPS tracking system, electronic logbook entries, fuel receipts, and truck stop security footage created an ironclad alibi that should have made the fraud immediately obvious to any competent investigation. But the sophistication of the identity theft operation had clearly anticipated this exact problem. The thief wasn't simply using Anderson's stolen credit cards for random purchases. He was systematically impersonating Anderson himself, using advanced techniques and insider knowledge that convinced financial institutions, merchants, and security systems that all transactions were completely legitimate. "I need you to cancel all my cards immediately and reverse every one of those charges," Anderson demanded, his voice rising with frustration and growing panic. "I can prove beyond any doubt that I was in Wyoming and Utah during the entire time those Las Vegas transactions were occurring. Someone has stolen my identity and is using my personal information to commit systematic financial fraud." The bank's response was bureaucratically frustrating and operationally devastating. "We'll need to initiate a formal fraud investigation following federal banking regulations, which typically requires 7 to 10 business days to complete properly. During that investigation period, all your accounts will remain frozen to prevent any additional unauthorized transactions. You'll need to file official police reports and provide comprehensive documentation of your actual whereabouts during all disputed timeframes." 7 to 10 business days would completely destroy Anderson's delivery schedule, damage his carefully cultivated professional relationships, and potentially cost him his contract with the shipping company that provided 60% of his annual income. Worse still, being stranded without access to funds would leave him unable to purchase fuel, food, or lodging while the investigation slowly proceeded through its bureaucratic channels. Anderson immediately contacted his employer's emergency hotline and explained the rapidly deteriorating situation to the night dispatcher on duty. The company's response was sympathetic in tone, but strictly limited in scope. They could advance him enough money to complete his current delivery obligation, but long-standing company policy explicitly prohibited them from becoming involved in drivers' personal financial problems or identity theft situations. "Mike, I really feel for you, but this kind of thing has been happening more and more often lately," the dispatcher explained with genuine concern. "We've had 8 drivers just this year deal with serious identity theft while they were out on the road. It's like someone is specifically and systematically targeting professional truckers who travel predictable routes through certain geographic areas." The suggestion that Anderson might be merely one victim among many in a coordinated identity theft operation was simultaneously reassuring and terrifying. Reassuring because it meant he wasn't being personally targeted for unknown reasons or past conflicts, but terrifying because it suggested a sophisticated criminal organization that had developed systematic methods for exploiting the unique vulnerabilities of commercial drivers. Anderson's next call was to the Rawlins Police Department to file the police report required by his bank's fraud investigation procedures. The officer who responded to his call was Detective Janet Martinez, a 15-year veteran who had been investigating identity theft cases involving commercial drivers for the past 2 years. "We've taken dozens of reports exactly like yours in the past 8 months, Detective Martinez explained, as she completed Anderson's paperwork with practiced efficiency. Professional truckers who stop for mandatory rest periods at specific facilities along Interstate 80 and Interstate 25 are having their identities systematically stolen by someone who has access to extremely sophisticated equipment and detailed insider information about credit card security systems." The pattern was disturbingly consistent across all reported cases. Experienced drivers with excellent credit ratings and spotless driving records would stop for federally mandated rest periods at certain truck stops, following all recommended security procedures and industry best practices. Within 24 to 48 hours, substantial fraudulent charges would appear on their accounts, almost always in Las Vegas or Denver, and always involving someone who could provide proper identification documents and correct PIN numbers to complete transactions. "The thieves aren't just stealing credit card numbers like typical financial criminals," Martinez continued. her voice reflecting frustration with the sophistication of the operation she was investigating. They're creating complete identity packages that include fake driver's licenses, social security cards, birth certificates, and other supporting documents that allow them to pass comprehensive verification as the actual cardholders during high-value transactions. Anderson's case was particularly troubling because the identity thief had somehow accessed his wallet and extracted his identification documents without leaving any detectable signs of forced entry to his truck. Either the criminal possessed locksmith skills sophisticated enough to defeat commercial vehicle security systems without triggering alarms, or he had access to inside information about specific truck configurations, alarm systems, and security procedures. The investigation that followed Anderson's police report would eventually reveal details about the identity theft operation that were far more disturbing than simple financial fraud. The criminals weren't just stealing money from truckers. They were gathering comprehensive personal information about commercial drivers for purposes that extended far beyond credit card fraud and into areas of national security concern. Federal investigators who became involved in Anderson's case discovered that stolen trucker identities were being used to create fraudulent credentials for individuals seeking to obtain commercial driver's licenses through illegal means. Foreign nationals with questionable backgrounds and unknown intentions were using Anderson's stolen identity and those of other drivers to gain unauthorized access to the American transportation system, potentially for purposes related to terrorism, espionage, or large-scale criminal operations. Anderson's stolen identity had been used not just for the obvious credit card fraud in Las Vegas, but to submit an application for a commercial driver's license in Nevada under his name and personal information. The application included all of Anderson's correct personal details, social security number, and address information, along with fraudulent supporting documentation that suggested the applicant was Anderson himself seeking to update his credentials for a new employment opportunity. The individual who had submitted the fraudulent license application using Anderson's identity didn't match Anderson's physical description in height, weight, eye color, or general appearance, but the application process relied heavily on documentary evidence rather than biometric verification or comprehensive background investigation. If the fraud had been successful, it would have given a complete stranger with an unknown background legal authority to drive commercial vehicles throughout the United States while using Anderson's identity, reputation, and hard-earned credentials. The national security implications were staggering when federal investigators began to comprehend the full scope of what they were dealing with. An unknown individual with unrevealed background, possible foreign connections, and questionable intentions would have possessed legal authority to transport cargo of any kind, access secure facilities and military installations, cross international borders, and travel throughout the United States using credentials stolen from a legitimate driver with an excellent safety record and existing security clearances. Anderson's case became a central component of a major federal investigation that eventually identified an international identity theft network specifically targeting American commercial drivers who transported valuable, sensitive, or strategically important cargo. The operation was headquartered in Eastern Europe, but operated through sophisticated sleeper cells in major American cities, focusing specifically on drivers whose routes included defense contractors, technology companies, and government facilities. The criminal network had systematically infiltrated dozens of truck stops along major interstate corridors throughout the American West, installing sophisticated card-reading equipment in fuel pumps, payment terminals, and ATM machines. But their primary method for obtaining comprehensive identity information was even more insidious and difficult to detect. They had recruited and were paying substantial sums to truck stop employees who could access drivers' personal belongings during mandatory rest periods. The federal investigation revealed that numerous truck stop workers along Interstate 80, Interstate 25, and Interstate 40 were receiving regular payments from the criminal organization to photograph drivers' identification documents, copy credit card information, install tracking devices in trucks carrying valuable cargo, and report detailed information about drivers' schedules, routes, and security procedures. The operation combined systematic identity theft with comprehensive intelligence, gathering about American transportation networks, shipping patterns, security procedures, and the personal information of drivers who had access to sensitive facilities and valuable cargo. Anderson's truck had been specifically selected because his regular routes included deliveries to defense contractors and technology companies whose shipping patterns and security procedures were of significant interest to foreign intelligence services. A sophisticated tracking device discovered hidden in Anderson's truck during the federal investigation had been recording his precise locations, detailed routes, customer stops, and security procedures for over 4 months before the identity theft occurred. The criminals possessed comprehensive data about his operational patterns, customer relationships, facility access procedures, and security protocols that could be invaluable for planning sophisticated cargo theft operations or worse. Most disturbing to federal investigators was the discovery that Anderson's stolen identity was actively being used to conduct surveillance and intelligence-gathering operations against other commercial drivers and transportation facilities. The fraudulent Nevada commercial driver's license allowed the criminal impersonating Anderson to access restricted areas of truck stops, transportation facilities, and customer locations where legitimate drivers might not suspect surveillance by someone carrying proper credentials and identification. The scope of the intelligence-gathering operation became clear when investigators analyzed the data collected through Anderson's compromised identity. The criminals had used his credentials to access driver lounges, shipping offices, and secure parking areas at dozens of facilities across multiple states, gathering detailed information about other drivers, cargo shipments, security procedures, and facility layouts. Federal investigators estimated that the criminal network had compromised the identities of more than 1,200 commercial drivers over a 3-year period, using those stolen identities to place foreign nationals in positions where they could gather intelligence about American transportation networks, cargo patterns, security procedures, and potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited for various criminal or hostile purposes. The investigation expanded dramatically when analysts discovered that several individuals who had obtained fraudulent commercial licenses using stolen driver identities had subsequently obtained employment with transportation companies that handled sensitive government cargo, including military equipment, classified materials, and strategically important civilian supplies. Background investigations revealed that at least 47 individuals with questionable documentation and uncertain loyalties had been operating commercial vehicles using credentials obtained through identity theft, potentially for years, while transporting cargo that included defense-related materials, sensitive technology, and other items that could compromise national security if diverted to unauthorized recipients. Most alarming was the discovery that 18 of these individuals remained unaccounted for after the criminal network was finally identified and dismantled through Anderson's case. Federal authorities estimated that nearly 24 people with unknown backgrounds, possible foreign connections, and uncertain intentions were still operating commercial vehicles somewhere in the United States using credentials obtained through systematic identity theft operations. The investigation revealed that the criminal network had been systematically targeting experienced drivers with security clearances, excellent credit ratings, and established relationships with high-value customers, using their stolen identities to create a shadow transportation network that could be activated for smuggling operations, terrorist activities, espionage missions, or other hostile purposes when required. Anderson's stolen identity represented just one component of a much larger and more sophisticated threat to American transportation security than anyone had previously imagined possible. The criminals weren't just stealing money. They were systematically infiltrating and mapping the entire American commercial transportation system for purposes that remained unclear, but were certainly hostile to American interests. The aftermath of the federal investigation led to comprehensive changes in security protocols at truck stops nationwide, including mandatory biometric verification systems for fuel purchases, enhanced background checks, and continuous monitoring for employees with access to driver information, and new federal requirements for reporting suspicious activities that might indicate ongoing identity theft operations. Anderson's experience also prompted fundamental changes in how commercial drivers were advised to protect their personal information while traveling. The traditional practice of carrying identification documents and credit cards became recognized as a critical security vulnerability that sophisticated criminals could exploit through increasingly advanced methods and insider access. The lesson that emerged from Anderson's ordeal was profoundly sobering. In an era of electronic commerce and digital identity verification, commercial drivers had inadvertently become prime targets for international criminal networks that understood that stealing a trucker's identity provided access not just to financial accounts, but to the entire American transportation infrastructure. For Michael Anderson personally, the identity theft became a life-altering ordeal that extended far beyond temporary financial inconvenience or professional disruption. The investigation and recovery process required him to prove his identity repeatedly through bureaucratic procedures, document his whereabouts during specific time frames across multiple states, and cooperate extensively with law enforcement agencies throughout the investigation. The financial recovery process took 14 months and required Anderson to hire attorneys who specialized in complex identity theft cases involving national security implications. Even after the fraudulent charges were reversed and his credit rating was eventually restored, he continued to discover new accounts opened in his name, fraudulent activities conducted using his stolen information, and unauthorized uses of his identity in contexts he never learned about. The psychological impact of the identity violation proved even more challenging and long-lasting than the financial consequences. Anderson developed severe anxiety about stopping at unfamiliar truck stops, became obsessive about wallet security and document protection, and found himself constantly checking his credit reports and financial accounts for signs of new, fraudulent activity or unauthorized access. The sense of violation that came from knowing complete strangers had used his identity to live alternate lives, make financial decisions, and potentially engage in criminal activities created a persistent feeling of vulnerability that affected every aspect of his professional and personal existence. The knowledge that his name, reputation, and credentials might still be in use by individuals with unknown intentions and possible hostile purposes created ongoing anxiety that never fully resolved. Anderson's employer eventually terminated his contract despite the obvious fact that he was clearly a victim rather than a security risk. The company's risk management department decided that drivers whose identities had been compromised by international criminal networks posed unacceptable security risks for continuing to transport sensitive cargo to defense contractors and technology companies. The loss of his primary employment forced Anderson to completely rebuild his career with a new employer, undergo additional comprehensive background investigations and security clearance reviews, and accept significantly lower-paying assignments while his credentials and reputation were slowly restored through bureaucratic processes that took months to complete. The criminal organization that stole Anderson's identity had effectively destroyed his professional reputation, financial stability, and personal sense of security through actions that took them perhaps minutes to accomplish, but required him years to overcome. The asymmetry between the ease of committing identity theft and the difficulty of recovering from it became a defining aspect of Anderson's experience. Today, Anderson drives for a smaller transportation, estimated that at least 31 people with unknown backgrounds, questionable documentation, and uncertain loyalties were still operating commercial vehicles somewhere in the United States, using credentials obtained through systematic identity theft operations. The investigation revealed that the criminal network had been methodically targeting experienced drivers with security clearances and established customer relationships, using their stolen identities to create a comprehensive shadow transportation network that could potentially be activated for smuggling operations, terrorist activities, espionage missions, or other activities hostile to American interests whenever such capabilities might be required. Anderson's stolen identity had been used not just for financial fraud and fraudulent license applications, but also for obtaining employment with transportation companies, accessing secure facilities, gathering intelligence about shipping patterns and security procedures, and possibly activities that remained classified within the ongoing federal investigation. The full scope of what criminals had accomplished using Anderson's name, reputation, and credentials remained partially unknown, even after the investigation concluded, creating ongoing anxiety about potential future consequences from activities he never knew about and couldn't control or prevent. The aftermath of the investigation led to fundamental changes in transportation security protocols, including enhanced identity verification requirements for commercial drivers, biometric tracking systems for facility access, continuous monitoring of driver credentials and employment history, and new federal requirements for reporting suspicious activities that might indicate ongoing identity theft or infiltration attempts. Anderson's experience also prompted comprehensive reviews of hiring practices within the transportation industry, background investigation procedures for commercial driver license applications, and security protocols for protecting driver information during routine business operations and transactions. The lesson that emerged from Anderson's ordeal resonated throughout the transportation industry. International criminal networks had recognized that American commercial drivers represented valuable targets whose stolen identities could provide access to transportation infrastructure, secure facilities, sensitive cargo, and intelligence about shipping patterns that was worth far more than simple financial fraud. For those who drive America's highways carrying the cargo that maintains economic prosperity and national security, the realization that their personal identities had become valuable commodities for international criminal networks represented a fundamentally new category of threat that required completely different approaches to personal security and professional protection. The true horror of Anderson's identity theft lies not in the immediate financial losses or temporary professional consequences he suffered, but in the discovery that criminals were systematically using stolen trucker identities to infiltrate America's transportation infrastructure with foreign nationals whose backgrounds, intentions, and ongoing activities remain largely unknown to this day, as federal investigators noted in their classified summary report. The systematic targeting of commercial driver identities represents a significant and ongoing threat to transportation security that extends far beyond financial fraud into areas of national security concern. The use of stolen credentials to place unvetted foreign nationals in positions where they can access sensitive facilities, transport valuable cargo, and gather intelligence about shipping patterns poses risks to economic and military security that we are still working to fully understand and effectively address. The highways remain busy with commercial traffic that keeps America's economy functioning. Drivers still need to stop for mandatory rest periods and fuel purchases, and the transportation system continues to depend on the reliability, integrity, and security consciousness of professional drivers. But since November 8, 2024, Those drivers operate with the knowledge that their greatest vulnerability might not be the cargo they carry, the weather they encounter, or the mechanical systems they depend on, but the very identities that allow them to do their jobs. Anderson still drives those same highways today, still stops at truck stops for fuel and federally mandated rest periods, still carries the cargo that keeps America's economy and defense systems operational. But now he does so with the constant awareness that somewhere out there, someone might still be using his name, his credit history, his professional reputation, and his personal identity to engage in activities he cannot imagine and would never approve of.